Australia, traditionally, their batting has been their strongest point. They sort of ground teams down to the ground, scoring big runs. So to see them capitulate for 85 all out and lose the last 8 wickets for 40 runs, it's a major shock, but it's also testimony to the brilliance of South Africa's bowling, utilising the conditions to the best of their abilities. I mean, the way that Vernon Philander set the tone right up front on the first morning, and then he was followed up by Kagiso Rabada and Kyle Abbott. So I think it's a bit of both, but Australia as a country, I think they're in a bit of shock because these things generally haven't happened to them before. They're normally the ones sort of putting the boot in. It makes the achievement that much more remarkable. I think losing Dale Steyn on the first day really of the tour, and knowing that you're coming here without AB de Villiers, previous teams may have used that as an excuse, but this team not that long ago was in a similar place where Australia is right now, losing to India heavily and then coming back home and losing to England heavily. So I think one thing that Faf du Plessis has said is there's a lot of resilience in the team, because they've also been on the wrong side of these defeats and they hurt. And I think a lot of these young players who are now stepping up understood that they need to step up. There's no excuse if a senior player is not performing or if a senior player is not there at all. It's up to them to sort of step into the breach, and guys like Rabada and Bavuma and Quinton de Kock, they were in India and they did suffer those losses, and they know what it feels like. So I think it's a sense of stepping up and making sure that they don't go back to those dark days. It's a very interesting debate, and it's gathering momentum, obviously, with the success that Faf du Plessis has had, not just in this Test series. Before this, Australia were in South Africa playing a one-day series, and Faf du Plessis led them to a 5-0 whitewash there, which was a first for Australia. And the interesting is, Faf du Plessis has always been the leader between the two. When they went to school together way back when, it was Faf du Plessis who was the captain and AB de Villiers was just the precocious talent. And it's funny how it's worked out that AB de Villiers has been injured at this phase when South African cricket is sort of turning around. And I think the sensible thing may well be to allow Faf du Plessis to continue in the role, because it seems to come a lot more naturally to him, and the players seem to follow his style of leadership a lot more. It looks a lot more relaxed. Not to say that AB de Villiers doesn't inspire in his own way, but it seems to come a lot more naturally to Faf du Plessis, and it doesn't seem to affect his game as much, whereas AB de Villiers being the star batsman, it almost looks sometimes that it's overwhelming to be the captain as well as the star player as well as everything. So maybe the best thing for South African cricket is the fact that AB de Villiers was injured through this transitional phase, and Faf du Plessis has emerged and shown his leading credentials at the highest level in probably the toughest place to captain for a visiting captain, which is Australia. I think Australian cricket is in a very difficult position at the moment, because for a long time it was almost impossible to break into the squad, never mind the playing 11, because they had such depth and strength. Their first class game was sort of the barometer. They set the standard around the world, and a lot of their players who were very good at first class level ended up going to countries like England to sort of prolong their careers because they just couldn't get into the Australian side. For some reason they seem to have taken their eye off the ball, in the sense that they've tried to match Indians' commercialization with gimmicks like T20 cricket, their Big Bash League, and playing pink ball cricket and trialing different things in their first class format. And they've sort of moved away from their traditional strengths, which is batting for a long time and bowling well and playing hard, fast cricket, which sort of demoralized a lot of teams before. They've taken their eye off the ball in the first class game, and I think they're suffering now because they're producing a lot of perhaps David Warner type cricketers who get off to fast starts but are a bit skittish, but they're not really sort of players of substance who can play the test match innings that they required in this test match, for example, in Hobart, where conditions weren't in the favour of the batsmen, but because everyone is playing a shot a minute, they collapse as quickly as they have. And it's not the first time they've collapsed. They did it in Sri Lanka as well. They've done it in England. So it's a symptom of almost too much one-day cricket and T20 cricket, and they've taken their eye off the ball of their traditional strengths, and they're suffering for it. And it's going to be a difficult sort of rebuilding phase for them now, because most of their youngsters now, their first priority is T20 cricket, and that's where the money is, that's where the hype is. If you look at it, I mean, the only other viable option for Australia would probably be David Warner. And because those are the only two batsmen in that top six who are actually guaranteed of their spots at the moment. So you can't really look beyond that. And I think Steve Smith, he struggled. You could see he was a broken man by the end of this test match. He stood on the other end and watched at least 13, 14 wickets fall around him over the course of both innings. And that, as a captain, has got to be demoralising. But you can't really see any other options unless they do go to Warner, who I think that burden of being captain as well as sort of being your free-flowing opener, it may be too much and it may curtail him from playing his natural game. So it's going to have to continue under Steve Smith, and they may have to suffer a few more defeats and struggle a bit more before they get it right. But I think they have to sort of go back to their basics and emphasise the importance of being strong first-class cricketers in order to become strong test players, because that's how they sort of led modern cricket into the 21st century, and they seem to have taken their eye off the ball, and they need to go back to those traditional strengths. Before the start of the series, the pink ball test match was South Africa's biggest concern because it's so alien to them. Australia obviously played that first ever one against New Zealand. Australia played that first one against New Zealand last year, and it was a great spectacle, and there were concerns about how much the ball was doing around dusk. So it was South Africa's biggest concern, but after what's transpired in these two test matches, South Africa will go into that almost playing it as a freebie, because the series is won and a lot of their players can sort of play and express themselves, and Australia now are desperate and they need to sort of turn it around. They expect massive crowds, which we haven't had in Perth or Hobart, but there's going to be a massive audience tuning in, coming in after work and watching and expecting a reaction. So there's actually a lot more pressure. So I think that almost plays into South African hands as well, because the series is won, so they're fine and they can just play and express themselves. The timing of the win and how emphatic it was has definitely stolen the headlines away from rugby. We actually don't even talk about rugby at the moment. It's so poor. So it's great to see the South African cricket team sort of picking up the torch and being the standard bearers for success in the country at the moment. And especially doing it in Australia, to Australia, who for a long time were almost like the All Blacks. You'd wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning South African time to see that it's been yet another pummeling down under, and to see it, the sort of boot on the other foot, it's great and it's refreshing, and it's obviously going to inspire a lot of more success, hopefully, for South Africa. And as long as the Springboks are still suffering, if the Proteas at least are doing things right and have turned their own corner, then it makes things a lot more palatable.